I have more copies of the class for tonight. There you go. I think, I got the microphone turned on, but I didn't turn it up enough. All right, would you raise your hand if you haven't received a copy of the lesson for tonight? And would like to have one. I should have had that. I got it. I got another one if you want to. Sure. Might as well. I made the copies. Might as well take them.
What you got? Okay.
Did I?
You just passed it out.
Yeah.
I've got that.
Okay. Austin, you want one? All right. Good to see you all tonight. Oh, you've got glass. You can have one though. I got plenty.
You just started?
Yeah, we just started. All right. So we are on our third lesson in the book of James. And as you can see from our sheet, I've gotten a little bit more ambitious as to what I'm planning to cover. And I'm planning to get even more ambitious next week, so we'll just see how it goes. My point in this class is not to make an exhaustive study, but to just to understand what James is trying to say. I would, however, recommend, if you want an exhaustive study, if you want somebody that will just, wring every little bit out of the book that you could possibly get, Florida College Bookstore has for sale a set of CDs of Homer Haley, his fall 1970 lectures on the books of, James and I think Philemon and one other book. I can't remember the three books, but it starts with James. And I think his philosophy in teaching that class was, you paid for this course and I'm going to give you your money's worth. Because he really does cover everything about the book of James. I've been listening to it, and he's almost caught up to me. Also, it's a great little time capsule because this is what would that be, 40 years ago, and it's very interesting to hear some of the issues of that day that they were dealing with. Some not unlike what we deal with today, but some very different. So if you have a chance to pick those up, I would highly recommend that. Now, looking at James, we're going to continue in chapter 1 and try to get through the middle of chapter 2. And I would like to begin by reading the last part of chapter 1. And then we'll discuss that separately. It says, starting in verse 19 of James chapter 1, and I'm reading from the English Standard Version. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Now, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, he says in verse 19. This is how we ought to be. And I pose the question, how would this attitude affect our relationship with our fellow Christians if we were quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger? Yes, sir?
Well, we wouldn't see very much strife in the church, would we?
Okay.
Of course, if we applied that to ourselves throughout our lives and in every aspect of it, there wouldn't be too much strife in our lives.
Okay. Exactly, yes.
Reminds me of terminology, I'm just going to kind of skip a little bit on here, but it reminds me of some of the terminology in 1 Corinthians 13 talking about love, which is probably better translated by our English word charity there.
Okay.
But it says love suffers long and is kind. And then it also says love thinks no evil, which means love doesn't, when something doesn't seem right to us, we do not automatically jump to a conclusion that impugns our brother's motive.
Okay.
That's love. Well, this is talking about love. You know,
It certainly is. Yes.
and I'll just give you an example. I got an email today from a preacher in India who was real upset because he wasn't invited to our preacher classes. And he was complaining to Brother Bill Beasley, who's over there right now. Well, I want to talk to Bill before I respond to this guy, but my first response to this guy is, and you will not be invited to our next set of classes. He should have thought a lot more before he wrote that email, because he impugned some very good men.
Yes.
You know, when we think well of our brethren, and then we go talk to them before and hear their side of it before we impugn them and before we get angry with them and so forth, it would solve, as Don said, a world of problems.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Approaching the situation with love. And yes, you're right. That's exactly what James is encouraging us to do by being humble enough to listen to the other person first, right? Yes, Don.
You could also go along with what Mark had to say, is go into Galatians 5 and read the fruit of the Spirit, and that would apply right here as well. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But that would all be wrapped up into being slow to speak, or quick to hear, slow to speak, or angry.
Okay. All right. So is James saying my second question, it is wrong to be angry, especially in light of verse 20. Now, what does verse 20 say? The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So is he saying that it's wrong to be angry?
If it is, then God was wrong to be angry with Israel because of Achan's sin
Okay.
at Jericho.
Okay.
What does Jesus say? Be angry, yet don't sin. Is that Jesus? I can't remember.
Be ye angry and sin not.
Right.
King James.
Yes.
Let
Yes,
the sun
Don.
go down on your wrath.
I think it says outburst of anger, throwing a fit and, causing a tirade that's frowned upon.
Okay. All right. Now, I would like at this point to apologize to you all because I stopped us in the middle of our context, I think. When I first looked at this passage, I looked at verses 118 as one thought, and then verses 19 through 27 as another thought. But I really think that this is all part of the same thought. Now, we've been talking about some very good things about being angry with one another, being quick to hear, to listen to one another, and slow to speak, and slow to be angry with one another. But I think if we take it in the context of this entire chapter, then we can see what we are to be listening to. And that is, in verse 18, of His own will He brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of His creatures. Now, what has He been talking about through this chapter? He's been talking about temptation. He's been talking about trials. And He's been talking about how it is not God's fault that we have temptation. And that we should not blame God for our temptation. But rather, we should realize that God has given us the Word. He's given us the good gift, every perfect gift, from above, coming down from the Father of lights, this is verse 17, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Now, if we were quick to hear the word of God and slow to speak our own will, and slow to anger, accusing God of tempting us, let's say, then how would that affect our relationship with God? It would be the same thing as with our brethren, right? We would have a much better relationship with God. We would do well to do that. And I want to look at Numbers chapter 20 for an example of someone who failed to do this. Numbers chapter 20. And if I could have someone please read verses 10 through 12 for me, please.
And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said to them, Here now, you brothers, must we bring water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly in the congregation and their ample strength. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you do not believe me to hallow me, and I have the children of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given you.
Okay. What did Moses do?
He did not give God the glory. He said, must we bring water forth from this rock?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And what else did he do that was wrong? All right, he struck the rock. And God had said to, in the passage before that, if anybody remember, speak to the rock. Okay, so not only did Moses strike the rock when he was supposed to speak to it, he didn't give God the glory. Why did he do that? Well, look at his language. Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? What was Moses' attitude, given this language? He was angry. He had it with him. He was impatient with them, yes.
Now, in all fairness, they pushed him to that point.
Yes, they did.
Moses was the meekest man on all the earth.
Yes, they did.
And they pushed him, but he didn't have the right to take the glory from God
Right.
and do what he wanted to nonetheless.
Right. And so let me make this point, and then I'll get to you, Wayne. Let me make this point. It is when we are at our wit's end that we need to watch for the devil.
Amen.
Because it is when we are being tested mightily that the devil will come and tempt us. We see that in, I just flew right out of my head. Well, we see that with Jesus, right? 40 days of fasting, and then the devil comes and tempts him, hey, make some bread. You're hungry, aren't you? Right? I mean, I would be I would be making some bread if I had Jesus' power, probably. What was the other example I thought of? Well, maybe it'll come to me later. All right, but anyway, Job. That's who I was thinking of. Job, right? Yeah. Job, the devil, God said, take everything he has. And then God said, okay, now strike him with boils, was it, I think. And he was at his lowest point. And then his wife says, curse God and die. You see? And so this is how the devil works. He waits for us to be at our lowest point, and then he comes with a temptation. Now, Wayne and then Don, I think.
We're past the point. I'm not going to bother making my point now.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. All right, Don, yes.
Well, when we look at what Job had to say, Job says, naked from my mother's womb I came, and naked I shall return. In other words, I came in this world with nothing, I leave with nothing. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the Lord God.
Right. And we see that Job was righteous, Jesus was righteous, and Moses, even though we really understand that he was pushed to the limit, and we understand his response because we do the same thing, don't we? And even worse, and with even less temptation, Moses still gave in. And he let his anger get the best of him. He was not quick to hear He was not slow to speak, and he was not slow to anger, and it did not produce the righteousness of God. Anger is not the proper response to temptation. Yes?
The very next verse, after what Job had to say, in all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong.
Exactly.
Or is he, okay, well, whatever happened.
Yeah. He said, I don't understand it. I really wish you would explain it.
God,
But,
control.
yeah. All right. So anger is not the proper response to temptation. Accusing God is not the proper response to temptation. But what does James say that we need to do to prepare for temptation in this passage? Verse 21.
But we got to put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, ESV. And that actually, I mean, if you notice, that's the anger of man is right there with all filthiness and rampant wickedness. It's the same thing, same category.
Right.
That's how bad it is to God.
And when we put those things away, then what does it allow us to do?
Prove ourselves to the Word. It's yours.
Okay, all right, but first, before we can do the word, we have to, he says in verse 21, receive it, right. So we have to get out this filthiness, this rampant wickedness that we allow to kind of soil us, right? Get that out so that we can receive with meekness the implanted word. Yes?
It is remarkably parallel to something that Peter says in 1 Peter 2. Therefore, putting aside all wickedness and all malice and hypocrisy and envy and all slander, like newborn babies, long for the pure milk of the Word, so that by it you may grow in respect to salvation, if you have tasted the kindness of the Lord.
Right. And just as an aside, you reminded me of something. Ralph Walker used to teach a series on the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes, he hypothesized, or I don't know, maybe it's more than a hypothesis, was more than just a list of the character traits that you have to be blessed. But if you really look at the whole list together, you see a progression. You see someone who is emptying themselves out and then filling themselves up with the Spirit of God. And so I challenge you to look at that and see if you see the same thing when you look at the Beatitudes. Okay, so the implanted word, implanted is the Greek word emphutos, it just means planted in us. And phuo, I believe, phuo is a root, I think, of this. I think that's why I put that there, because it means to beget or bring forth, produce. And so the idea is the word is implanted in us and it springs up and grows within us. But before that can happen, we have to clean house and make room. We have to get rid of that filthiness and rampant wickedness. So once we have received the word, then we can, can the word be implanted in us if we don't do it? Is the next question. As we move on to the next section here. Can we say that the word is implanted in us if we're not doing it?
Well, we can say that, but that doesn't make it so.
Okay. All right, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. If you look at Mark chapter 4, verses 13 through 20, that's the parable of the sower, right? And there's the 4 different kinds of soil there. All right? 2 of the soils, the seed actually got into the soil and actually sprang up. And it was either choked out or didn't have any root because it wasn't good soil. It was there were cares of the world. There just wasn't anything there, no nourishment. But only the good soil bore fruit, and that's what we're talking about: doing the word or bearing fruit. Now, I find this next passage about the parable of the mirror to be one of my favorite passages in the Bible. I think it's such a great visual for us to think about. And I don't know how much you've given thought to this, but he calls being a hearer of the word and not a doer, like looking into a glass, into a mirror, and then going away and forgetting what kind of person you were. So I ask the question, when you look in a mirror, what are you looking for? When you get up in the morning, you look in the mirror, assuming that you're not frightened to look in the mirror, what are you looking for? Yes?
Well, it depends on the kind of person you are. Some people are looking for stuff they can fix. Some people are just saying, look at me, look how good I am.
Okay.
You know, they're looking on top of it.
All right. So does everybody agree with that? That's what you're looking in the mirror to see hopefully what you can fix. If you look in the mirror and there's flaws in what you see, but you either don't see them or you just ignore them and you go about your day, what kind of effect is that going to have on you later on? I mean, if your hair is sticking straight up and you go out and about your day, go to work or whatever, that's going to be embarrassing, is it not? Okay. So I think this is the idea. Yeah, I look at the first part of that, the person that looks intently at his natural face in a mirror and then goes away and forgets what he was like. There's two ways you can look at it. Either they ignore what they see in the mirror, or they look in the mirror and they're happy with it. And I kind of think of, I remember Happy Days. You remember Fonzie, he's in the bathroom and he's looking in the mirror and he goes to, hey, and then he puts his comb away, Are we like that? When we look at the Word of God, are we like that? Do we read and say, yeah, oh, James, you're right. You're absolutely right. And then we don't change anything about ourselves? Then we are like this man that looks in the mirror and then forgets what he's like. The purpose of looking into this mirror, which my Bible's on here, just so you know. The purpose of looking in this mirror is to see who we are compared to what we should be. All right? And, so we can fix it, but really just so that we can recognize it. And I think when we look at the idea of temptation in this context, and the idea that our temptation comes from our own flaws, that's one reason why we look in the mirror. So we know what our flaws are. We know, hey, I've got a problem with that. I better be careful as I go through my day. That if I'm tempted to do that I watch out for that I watch out for the devil tempting me in that way, because that's a problem I have. That's a weakness I have. So just some ideas about the mirror. The other thing people do, and this is one thing that Homer Haley points out in his class, and I thought was interesting. They're looking in the mirror on Sunday, and the preacher's preaching, and they're doing this. So, I see Don over there. He's got that problem. Yeah. The other Don, he's got that problem. Yeah. And you're looking in the mirror at other people. Well, that's not what the mirror's for. The mirror's for you to look at and for you to see your flaws and fix them and be aware of them. All right, so why does James call the Word, he says, the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, why does he call it the law of liberty?
Jesus said, the truth shall set you free. You shall know the truth shall set you free, John 17:17.
All right, very good.
To some extent, it's, the expression is almost an oxymoron, because, you think of laws, you start thinking of all these restrictions that are placed on you.
Mm-hmm.
This is the law of liberty. What is that?
Without some restrictions, you cannot truly be free.
Okay.
You have anarchy when you have no restrictions,
All right.
and that's not freedom.
So what is the law of liberty? Liberty, of course, is freedom. What is it? What are we free from?
Ultimately, sin.
Sin. Okay. Look at Romans chapter 6, verses 17 and 18. What were you going to say, Don? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, freeing us from the slavery of sin.
Right. Exactly. And that's exactly what this passage says. Could someone read that for me, please? Verses 17 and 18 of Romans chapter 6.
But thanks be to God that whereas you were servants of sin, you became obedient from the heart to that form of teaching whereunto you were delivered. And being made free from sin, you became servants of righteousness.
Okay. Now, so we're made free from sin, but we're still servants, right? We're still servants to righteousness. Why are we servants to righteousness? Because God put us in shackles and made us be righteous?
You're going to be a slave to somebody. The question is who? You're going to be a slave to the one who sets you free or the one who enslaves you?
Okay. All right.
Are you going to be a slave to the one you choose to be enslaved to, or to the one who will force you in slavery, which the devil will force you in slavery?
Okay. All right. So if we choose not to make the choice, then who are we choosing? The devil. Right? Right. We have to choose to be slaves to righteousness. So in that way, we are free because we've made the choice. That's one way to think about it. Does that make sense? Or am I just talking in circles? Does that make sense to everybody? Yes.
It makes more sense if you go to Galatians 5:1.
Okay, thank you. That's another passage I had, and probably should have gone there first. Thank you. Galatians 5:1. You want to read that for us?
For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery.
Okay. So, it's a yoke of slavery. A yoke of slavery, not to Christ, but to sin. And Christ has set us free from that. So, and ultimately, where's our freedom? In Christ, which has its culmination in?
Well, in the first century, if you look at Galatians 2, if you back up to the first part of the letter, he talks about in verse 4, talks about the false brethren brought in secretly to sneak in to spy out the liberty that they had in Jesus, in order to bring them into bondage. In other words, forcing or trying to get them to commit to the old law, and the ordinances which nobody could keep.
Mm-hmm.
But we have grace now through God, and that comes by the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, his perfect life that led to that gives us that relationship with God that the law could never do, because nobody could keep the law,
Right.
except for Jesus.
Right. Right. And so we understand the idea that there was no freedom before the law of liberty. There was no freedom from sin.
Great freedom in Jesus.
Yes. Were you going to say
And
something?
there's also Galatians chapter 5 and verse 13 and 14. For you have been called freedom, brethren, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love be enslaved to one another. For the entire law is fulfilled in a word, in you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So there's this idea that with freedom comes a certain responsibility. That responsibility is to use our freedom for the purpose for which God gave it to us. And in the process of doing that, actually fulfill the law that we were freed from in the first place.
Right. So one of the great paradoxes of Scripture is that we are free, but we enslave ourselves to one another, to God, but
That's a really good point.
yes.
Paul, Peter, and these guys also, when they identify themselves, when they're writing their letter, they identify themselves as bond servants,
Yes.
bond slaves.
Yes. James does as well. Yes.
Yeah, so, that's a great point.
All right, so I think we've already looked at the next question. How is the perfect law of liberty like a mirror? It is what we look into to see our flaws, to see how to fix them, and how to make sure that they do not lead us to sin. So to sum up, this is kind of my summary of this idea of the being slow to anger and the perfect law of liberty. It says that we're supposed to persevere, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts. The proper response to temptation is not anger at God nor accusation of Him, but a realization that it is our flaws that bring about temptation. We must build a perseverance in obeying the Word that has been implanted inside of us. Instead of being angry about the trials and temptations that come our way, we should count it all joy. as we read in verse 2. And so to me, this kind of brings it full circle, where he says, count it all joy in the beginning. That is a contrast to the anger that he speaks about here. Now, so continuing on with the idea of being a doer and not a hearer of the word, we have this idea of religion. Now, religion, I don't know how to pronounce this word. I don't know. How would you pronounce it, Wayne? Thrasikos?
Pronounce it?
Yeah.
I would pronounce it Thraskos.
Thraskos, okay, thank you. And which means religious, fearing or worshiping God and to tremble. And all my definitions I'm getting from Strong's, more or less. Fearing or worshiping God to tremble. And we'll talk about trembling later on in our study of James. But James presents a dichotomy between bridling the tongue and deceiving the heart. So, what does he mean there? Why does he contrast those two things? Bridling the tongue or deceiving the heart?
Words are ultimately a reflection of what is in the heart.
Okay.
And one point that was made to me a while ago was that your words are not sufficient to commend you to God. I mean, I can be deceiving everybody around me with my words and my heart's still in the wrong place. But my words are sufficient to condemn me before God, because there are times when they expose what's evil about my heart. So it's kind of a two-edged sword there.
Okay. All right, that's a good answer. So, how does the one who thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue relate to our discussion of verses 22 through 25 about looking into the perfect law of liberty and so forth?
Well, going back to being swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath.
Yeah.
I mean, all of this is, of course, tied into the same context. And so the one who thinks he's religious and he does all the right stuff, but he's a gossip, he's a slanderer, he curses with every other breath. We can list 100 ways that you can misuse your tongue. That person isn't going to make it. And James 2 begins to talk about the sin of partiality, and then it starts to talk about murder and adultery. Now, most people seem to miss the partiality. That's what James is really talking about there.
Right.
And they key in on murder and adultery. If the fellow says, well, I'm not guilty of murder, but he's guilty of adultery, well, he might as well have committed both. Now, he's working up to that here. But the sin of misusing your tongue is the same thing as murder and adultery.
Okay.
Sin.
Okay. All right. So, instead of that, now, so if you do that, if you don't bridle your tongue, your religion is worthless, he says. So, here's a person who's walking along, they think that they're a religious person, but they don't control their tongue. And they deceive their heart, and James says that's worthless. That's worthless. Well, it's the same thing as the one that looks into the perfect law of liberty and goes away and forgets who they are, right? It's worthless. You're not using the word the way that it's supposed to be. You're not religious the way that you're supposed to be. Religion, pure and undefiled, is what is the idea that he brings to us next. And of course, the words there are pure or clean and undefiled or unsoiled. So this is true religion. This is a religion that James is saying, listen up, because this is what you are supposed to do. If you really want to be a religious person, this is what you're supposed to do. If we are really religious, if we really fear and worship God with trembling, what will we do according to James? Will we just talk about religion?
The tongue is not enough.
The tongue is not enough.
Not enough to be a hearer or a talker. You must go out and be a doer.
Okay. So it's not enough just to tell others what we think. I mean, We can go around talking religion to people all the time, talking about, yeah, we had a good sermon Sunday, and I really understood. Do you understand this passage and that passage? Let me quote this chapter of the Bible to you. And how about I can quote the whole book of James? And yes. Oh, sorry, Don. What's that?
You got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk.
Okay, all right. Exactly. Yes, Don. The other Don.
I kind of like going back to Job for a lot of things, because, regardless of the circumstances that Job found himself in, he wasn't willing to charge God with wrong. He was dedicated to his religion, to his God, to his values. And I think I texted you this earlier, but Job says in chapter 23, verse 12, I have not departed from the command of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Now that's true religion. When the Word of God, or God, is more important to us than food, then we're doing what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. There's so many examples of how we conduct ourselves before God, and James is just adding to it. He's just pointing it out in just a little bit different way. But you've got all these examples. You've got Moses, you've got Job, you've got Noah. You've got all these guys. All these people, and then James does that and just starts searching through the scriptures.
All right, thank you. Yes, Wayne.
James brings up a particular example here of helping widows and orphans in their distress, which I think is interesting. And I don't want to get ahead of you, but I don't think that command is limited to widows and orphans at all. We're clearly, there's a point being made here, and it's the same point that Jesus makes throughout Luke's gospel about helping those who are less fortunate than yourself, giving to those who cannot repay you, loaning to those who cannot, pay back what is owed. And the point is made throughout. If you love those who love you, well, what good is that? Even the pagans and the sinners, even the worst person in the world does that. If you show kindness to those who are showing you kindness in return, well, anybody would do that. That doesn't put you on any level higher than pagans. And he says ultimately there's this instance of putting yourself out to the people of society who are so low on the totem pole they can't do anything to repay you, and who many of you probably, most people in that day and age would have looked at it and said, well, they deserve it anyway. There's an old Arabic proverb that says if you see a beggar on the street, kick him. Why should you be kinder to him than God has been? That was the mindset that these people thought in.
Interesting. Yeah.
But James is clearly espousing something that's quite the opposite of that.
Yeah, and I think that's the mindset that we're going to see in chapter 2 here, which we're not going to get to. But I do appreciate the discussion. It's been great. So let me just make sure I get your point. Is it enough for us to hear the word and then do it so that we keep ourselves unstained from the world? In other words, I don't go around doing what the world does. I keep myself spotless from the world. Is that it? Is that all there is to it?
You got half it right.
Got to do what's right, right?
Half right.
Yeah, and the other half is what he says here: visit the orphans and the widows in their affliction. Is there any way around that? Is that optional? No, it's not. Visit the orphans and the widows in their affliction. This is religion. So if we're coming to church on Sunday and Sunday night and Thursday night, we're here every time the doors are opened. Is that what it's all about? No. Okay, well, we're here every time the doors are open, and then we go out in the world and, we don't curse, and we don't drink, and we don't smoke, and we don't do all the things that you're not supposed to do. Is that what all there is to it?
All we've done is keep ourselves unstained.
Exactly. All right. So, but I think some of us, and I include myself in this, some of us have the idea that is all there is to it. Well, once you've done that, then you're a good person, you are a good Christian. And James says, no, that's not true. Visit the orphans and the widows in their affliction, those that need your help. Have you ever known anybody who could quote lots of scripture and expound upon its meaning, but never lifted a finger to help anyone? Or conducted their lives contrary to the word they were so fond of quoting? And I give you a warning. Are you that type of person? Where's your mirror? It's time for us to all pick up the mirror and make sure that we get a good look at ourselves. All right, so we'll continue with chapter 2. I had said for next week to, of course, do James 1:22, and to be prepared to discuss James 2:14 through 3:18, but I'm going to amend that. I'm going to amend that and say we'll just do James chapter 2 for next time. I think that will be enough. Any questions before we wrap it up? All right, we're out of time, so thank you for your attention.